The Ak-47 is one of the most iconic rifles in the history of firearms. Developed by Mikhail Kalashnikov for the Soviet Union, its simple and reliable design has led to it being copied in countries around the world, from the Eastern Bloc to the Western Bloc. Let's disassemble the Ak-47 today and learn about how it works, and also why its design has been imitated so much over the years. First up, AK-101. As recognizable as an AK-47 is, there's a lot that people don't know about it. Starting with what the AK even stands for. The rifle's full name is the Avtomat Kalashnikova 47, which simply translates to Kalashnikov's Automatic 47, as in 1947 was the year in which the first AK-47s were given to the Soviet military for trials. Kalashnikov has a whole family of automatics, some of which have gained their own notoriety. When the gun was being manufactured by Izmash, the successors of the AK-47 had increasing numbers like AK-74, AK-101, and 102, up to the AK-105. Once manufacturing shifted to the Kalashnikov concern, the numbering restarted from the AK-12 and has kinda been all over the place. The AK-47 is a gas-operated rifle that's chambered for the 7.62 x 39mm cartridge. It specifically uses a super robust, long-stroke gas system that we'll definitely get into, but for now, you should know that a system like this provides amazing reliability in all kinds of environments. The use of the 7.62 x 39mm rounds is an important part of the AK-47 bang-for-buck guarantee, because the Soviets were producing truckloads of them back in the day, and other companies produce these types of rounds too. The overview is great and all, but we promise to break this open and take a closer look inside the infamous AK-47. Let's do that now, starting with the cycle of operations. The key to the performance of the AK-47 is its very simple cycle of operations. It consists of a few large pieces that work together well enough and are resistant to things like snow and mud. Remember that this rifle was created for winter wars during the Second World War, and Russia itself is pretty prone to snowy and wet conditions. It's only natural that their rifle is weatherproof. The other plus to the components of the AK-47 is that it's all a combination of off-the-shelf systems. C.J. Chivers, a gun expert and author of The Gun, A History of the AK-47, compared the rifle to Mr. Potato Head. A bunch of pre-existing systems has been combined into one, leveraging the tested and proven track records of those systems and the easy availability of replacements. So, what does the cycle of operations of an AK-47 look like? It starts with, next we have the trigger. Y'all know how a trigger works. You turn off the safety, pull the sucker, and send a round flying. It's actually more complicated than that, but in the case of the AK-47, not considerably so. For all its simplicity in design, you actually get a selector switch with 3 firing modes on the AK. Safe, which means no fire, semi-auto, which means 1 bullet per trigger pull, and full auto, which will keep the rifle firing as long as you hold down the trigger. The trigger mechanism was partially borrowed from the work of John C. Garand. Yes, the maker of the M1 Garand, another iconic Great War era weapon. The other major contributor to the trigger design was Hugo Schmeisser, a German gunmaker who was a Soviet prisoner at the time. Let's not think too much about how Schmeisser might have been persuaded to help. Basically, the trigger releases the firing hammer, which in turn strikes a firing pin. This ignites the bullet primer, which then ignites the gunpowder that will fire the bullet. Once the bullet is fired, it leaves behind its casing as it makes its journey to the target. This leads us to, now for the receiver. As we mentioned before, one of the biggest strengths of the AK-47 is its battle-tested long-stroke gas operating system. We'll now look at how this works and why it's important. The receiver of the rifle consists of 2 chambers. One chamber is where the bullet will fly through on its way out of the muzzle. It's propelled through this barrel using the very gas that's being released from the ignition of the gunpowder. But this gas is a bit of a problem. Since this is supposed to be a full auto rifle, you wouldn't want gas to get trapped inside the receiver. Gun makers figured out long ago that you could just vent the gas, but rifles like the AK have a better use for it. This brings us to the second chamber. The barrel that the bullet whizzes through have an opening leading to this second chamber, which houses a gas piston. High-pressure gas released from the firing can escape into this chamber, where it has enough force to push the gas piston. What the piston does is it opens the bolt carrier and it shoves the bullet casing out of the carrier. On the opposing end of the chamber is a spring that pushes the piston back into its place, ready to get for the next burst of gas to activate it. You can't quite say that Kalashnikov really borrowed this system because it's basically open source at this point. What he did do is to make the stroke 50% longer than it needed to be. That allows the mechanism to work reliably, even if there's gunk or debris in the receiver. Once a bullet's gone, you'll need a new one. For that, we're heading to... Next we have the magazine. Nothing much to see here really. The magazine is spring-loaded, so once a bullet and its casing are gone, that spring simply loads another round into the chamber. We will point out the banana shape of the magazine, which is yet another of the great design choices behind the AK. This type of magazine has been used in Soviet rifles before, but Kalashnikov realized that the tapered shape of the magazine worked well with the tapered shape of the 7.62 x 39mm rounds. That meant it was less likely to jam. And now the AK-47. Simple, but lethal. Even if you don't know too much about guns, you can see how simple the AK-47 is in action. It basically only comprises three major components: the trigger group, the receiver with its piston mechanism, and the magazine. The core function of the gun depends on things that can never fail. A firing pin will not ignite the primer and gunpowder, and you can't have a fire without smoke. It's not like the opening in the barrel will suddenly decide to prevent gas from escaping through it, and the piston is just a cylinder of metal on a spring. We're exaggerating a little bit. No system can be perfect, but the AK-47 has definitely proven its reliability over almost a century and across dozens of battlefields. Among the users of the AK-47 are the many countries that were armed by the Soviets during the Cold War. These include Egypt, Cuba, Somalia, Iran, and Iraq. These militaries continue to use the AK-47 to this day, even though the country that made them collapsed 31 years ago. The AK-47 is pretty famous. Curiously, even the US has equipped some heroes with AK-47s. The most significant of these was their arming of the Mujahideen in Afghanistan to repel the Soviet invasion. Those same AK-47s were turned against the Americans when they invaded Afghanistan, 14 years after the Soviet invasion ended. And speaking of American forces, many veterans of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan preferred using Kalashnikovs in those desert countries. The sophisticated designs of American-made rifles didn't hold up to the sandy and dusty environments quite as well as this rifle from 1947 did. Conflicts with paramilitary groups like rebels and terrorists lead to a lot of surplus of AK-47s floating around the countries where these conflicts happen. A guy can pick up an AK off someone's dead body and the thing gets sold and bought and sold to someone who then gets killed by someone else, and the cycle repeats. It's a dark thing to realize that the AK-47 has a longer lifespan than some humans, and a single one of them might boast a heavy body count. As for which countries are making AK-47s now, the list is too long to write down. Basically, any country in the former Eastern Bloc that happens to have a gun factory is rolling AKs off their production lines. It's even rumored that you could go to bazaars in countries with gluts of weapons parts and have an AK hand-assembled for you while you wait outside. But you didn't hear that from us. The one country that doesn't make the AK-47 anymore is Russia. Like we said before, Kalashnikov has left this design behind and made many new iterations of his classic battle rifle. But they say that there are massive stockpiles of AK-47s in Russia to this day, and after everything you've seen today, you can bet that they work just as well as when they were new. Time to put this AK-47 back together and throw it on the rack. Since the AK-47 is such an iconic weapon, share the best stories you know about Kalashnikovs and their copies used around the world. Do you think there's any rifle that can match it in reliability and simplicity, or is this as good as it gets? Fire off in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.